Hello and welcome to Breaking Ground, a CheckProof podcast. I'm Joe Cage, Head of Customer Success at CheckProof and your host for today. We're so pleased to welcome Katie Woodhall, Safety Director for Beaver Excavating. Katie brings deep knowledge and experience in health and safety within the construction materials industry. She's also a regular speaker at the NSSGA, helping to shape the future of workplace safety across our industry. We're thrilled to have her with us today. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Thanks for having me.
To start off with, can you just tell us a bit about your kind of background?
So I grew up in a fourth generation mining family. So the rule in our family is that you have to work other places before you work in the family business. I actually went to college for art history and anthropology. That's what my degree is in. The running joke is, what do you do with a degree in art history? You work at Starbucks. So I did for a decade. I ended up being a manager, coach, mentor, which then led me to my next iteration, which is actually how I folded back into the industry and into safety. My father needed help. He was our VP of operations and the head of safety for the entire company. And we had about 150 employees. So that was actually how I got into safety. And the beauty of that learning experience is that on any given day, I might have been working in one of our aggregate quarries, or I may have been out on a paving crew. Our family's business was self-feeding, so we mined it, and then we fed asphalt plants and ready mix. So I kind of got exposed to all of it. We also had a 45 truck fleet for dump trucks and over-the-road hauling. So I may have been writing a heavy hauling permit or doing something for hazmat or the EPA, or I just kind of got into it.
Yeah, very varied.
Yeah, through all of it, though, I actually ended up going back to school and getting a degree in org development and leadership because it's people. It's always people.
And what would you say is something within your current role that that people might not expect, or something that might take them by surprise, that you do daily that they wouldn't expect you to do?
I spend much more of my time working with interpersonal issues and conflicts with people rather than compliance issues. A lot of what we do in drilling into root cause of any incident or any need in the field is really just figuring out where people are and how we can communicate with them better. We in this department and myself, we talk about feelings a lot. So it's really people issues first before it's compliance issues. We still live in an industry where we like to say things like, we've always done it this way and it's never been a problem.
Yeah.
And my response to that is, you're on borrowed time. Because if it hasn't happened yet, it probably will. But I think that there is a shift that is happening. And I think that we are creating a better place for people to talk about work-life balance, who their loved ones are, going home. And it's less about production than it is about people, which is good. I think that shift is happening.
But then, so you're an OSHA and MSHA trained instructor, sorry. You just kind of elaborate on that a little bit more.
So OSHA, simple terms, OSHA is Occupational Safety and Health Administration. That's the governing body for construction, manufacturing, medical, retail. MSHA is just the Mining Safety Health Administration. So in my role, I have to have knowledge of all three of those. And one of my highest priorities when I took over the safety department and the team that I'm working with now was to level set training and to get exposure so that at least everybody in the field, if they had questions, they had a resource to call, and then that resource can look it up. There is no way to know all of the regulations. What you need to be trained on more specifically is where to find it. To give you a broader arena, in my role, I oversee 4 companies in 9 states. So to have all of them in one room to talk about all those pieces and parts also allows them to understand the broader brushstroke of what the shared goal, I guess, is helpful, especially with safety.
So then, from your experience, what would you say is a common blind spot or a common safety issue that comes up when we're looking at operations in the heavy industry?
We tend to get very complacent and routine, and we also and I think that it's shifting, but the old school mentality of production over anything else is slowly dissipating. But we really can find ourselves in some unsafe scenarios when we are just worried about how fast we're going to do something instead of auditing a whole entire work site.
Mm-hmm. And where would you say companies typically struggle when it comes to applying safety standards consistently?
Generally, I would say it's everything, right? And I think that where we get ourselves in the most trouble is when we silo all of those things because they're all interrelated.
Yeah.
Part of the push from this department and what we've been working on really hard is just looking at things holistically, that everything is interconnected. So if we're not training properly, then we can't possibly document, right? And then we can't get into the rhythm of what pre-planning looks like and then the communication of that.
Certainly when you're in a large team, it's quite daunting to put yourself out there and say, hey, and be the only one to do that. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is the minute you put your hand up and you say that, then it opens the door up to everyone else. And I've seen it before where one person kind of puts their hand up, and then it's almost like a chain reaction.
If with your background in the industry too, part of what we understand is that there's monotony to it, right? So doing those safety talks every morning and talking about the same, we're doing the same work every day. So then of course all the hazards are the same and we're just it becomes white noise. And on some of the sites that we're on right now, we can have 150 people in the crew. So to gather those people up to your point and get one message out and make sure that everybody's listening without question. So if we can over communicate, I think it gets ahead of that.
Then if you had to say, okay, what's the most important habit or handful of habits that would make a successful safety first kind of environment in a company, what would you say that is?
Pre-planning always.
Yeah.
Taking that 5 minutes at the beginning of the day to really have a conversation, not speaking at crews, to really have that engagement and the interaction like you were talking about. And I think to your point, what you just said, it's invaluable to create a place where people can ask questions and be vulnerable. And so a lot of times, even when I know the answer, I'll ask because then it breaks the ice for other people to feel like they then can engage as well. So I think, so much of what we're doing right now is breaking down the scope of work that we're doing every single day into very minute steps. And not necessarily going over each step every morning, but maybe we pick one that is giving us trouble and we talk about that.
Is there any kind of stories from the field that you could kind of talk to us about when it comes to a safety protocol has either failed or succeeded when it comes to maintenance?
We work really hard to capture observations and near misses from the field. So we really have a beautiful library of successes because people are starting to really pay attention to that and be very analytical about how you can get ahead of it. I think that people often remember the really hard things. And that is unfortunately where the lessons are. I don't know how you guys frame it in Europe, but here we tell everybody that every regulation in OSHA has been written in blood because that's the truth. And so thinking about different stories, this is what I'll share with you. So in 2013, well before I worked at Beaver, we had a catastrophic crane accident. And what happened was the crane was lifting a load that was no more than 86 pounds, I think. And the cable broke and it brought the boom down. Unfortunately, we had 2 guys on the ground. The crane was not ours, and it wasn't operated by anybody that worked for Beaver. We just were working next to a subcontractor who was also working inside the mill. But when the boom came down, it actually crushed 2 of our employees and killed them.
Oh.
So, in the investigation, what happened was, because the mill was under, cameras, what they found is that the crane operator had been sitting in his cab doing his daily inspections, sitting down. And so for 6 months, he hadn't walked the crane. He hadn't checked the cables. He hadn't, I mean, I'm not even sure if he'd greased. I wasn't here, but there was nothing to create that catastrophic failure outside of a lack of proper inspection. And to go then, 5 days a week or whatever it was for 6 months without actually looking at anything is horrific, actually, because the subcontractor didn't do their job. We lost 2 of our employees. That is probably by far the greatest example that I have about what utilizing a proper system and forcing accountability when it comes to maintenance and inspections. We talk about it every safety crew lunch that we do. We have a toolbox talk about it that goes out every year. We have a moment of silence to commemorate what happened. It completely reshaped our crane policy. And Beaver itself has spoken with OSHA over the last decade over and over again about what we did for our crane policy. So we have a very intense third-party process that we go through with any crane. Even though you need to have an annual, we require 6 months. We have 2 lift directors. It just changed the landscape of who we are, all because there wasn't a proper equipment inspection done.
Yeah. So then now, when it comes to using third parties, how does that process look when it comes to making sure that the equipment is checked? Now, do you do anything differently now to make sure that they've checked their equipment properly?
So we have a number of fail safes. So if we are bringing a crane on that is going to be working for us, they have to go through a third-party inspection. They have to turn over all of the licensure and certifications for their operators. It's pretty intense, and we capture all of that electronically, so it's housed in one place. The other part of our policy that we adapted is that we will not allow any of our employees to work within the radius of any crane that we can't control. So these a lot of the really tight spaces that we're working on, these data centers that we've been doing work on, because we do the dirt work, we may be doing stonework up against a building, but they're flying steel, or they're bringing an HVAC unit in, and so we might be in the radius of a crane. Our employees are able to stop work and sit the entire time, so they're not in the way of that. Or they ask for those certifications even if they're not related to us, just so they know that the inspection has been done and they're certified to operate it. So we give them a lot of power so that for their own safety.
So they can say no if they're not comfortable. Yeah,
absolutely.
So going into kind of heading away from health safety directly and going more into kind of the technology space, which is kind of becoming an increasingly large part of the conversation in the industry. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for technology, AI, to support a safer kind of workplace?
Yeah, we in the past 2 years, we have really rolled pretty hard into the arena of cameras. And a lot of it is outward-facing cameras on any of our fleet trucks. Where it started for us was on our really large haul road trucks and the mass excavations that we were doing. So it's really helpful because we don't have as much oversight at night as we do during the day. The other thing that we've been talking about is tracking our equipment. So if, there's geo-tracking, but also the next iteration of what we're seeing from our insurance companies for AI is sensors. So if you're running a D8 and you've got sensors on the blade, they will go off if someone comes too close to you, or if you're too close to a piece of equipment or a barrier wall.
When it comes to the cameras, what would that be? What would you use the cameras for specifically? And not just recording the driving, I assume.
A lot of it is, cameras that are outward facing, so front and back. It captures at-fault accidents, but part of what they capture and what part of the notifications we get is if somebody picks up their phone, if their eyes are off the road. We get triggers we can set limits, like if they go over 80 miles an hour, then we get a trigger. So, we can set those parameters, and it's been really helpful because now we're able to tie, coaching conversations or disciplinary action to that. We just had an accident on Friday, and we had one of our zone trucks who was trying to get into a zone going at a very low rate of speed, and the person behind them on the on-ramp decided to just at top speed merge, and went right into the rear end of them. So It was a pretty catastrophic accident, but if we had had cameras, I think it would have given us a better idea of what was going on.
Yeah, an insight.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are, for us, that's the biggest thing. And what we've worked really hard is to integrate the communication out about every incident, no matter what the part of the company is, so that they understand that there is stuff going on. Like, you may have never had an incident on your job site, but I will tell you that there isn't a day that goes by that I don't have one across the board. So, but if you aren't hearing about it, you don't know. And that's part of what we've moved towards, is that every Wednesday, we found out that that's where our incidents are highest. So we put out a recap of incidents that happened the week before, so that their morning huddles have to take longer, and they read about other things that are going on in different parts of the company. So not only are they taking a pause, but they're also understanding that, what other struggles are other parts having, or successes. It could be a great near miss that we caught.
Yeah, of course.
So it allows them then to have that time and space to talk about it, so that they aren't so prickly about having a camera. They aren't so upset about the oversight, and they understand that it's a really beautiful tool to keep them safe.
Is there anything that's with cameras and sensors, of course, that's a lot of data. Do you utilize that data? And it sounds like you do, because you've already kind of identified that Wednesdays are a peak period.
Yep, we track observations and our near misses and our incidences, and so just I'm super grateful. I work for an incredible, the president of the company, and she is extremely data driven. So I know if I want to do anything, she's like, show me the data, which has just allowed us the opportunity and the support to dig into those numbers, and then we're able to propose new ideas because we have the data that support it. It's literally why we want to start working with CheckProof, because we understand that we'll have a better way of capturing that and getting ahead of it.
Yeah, and then using it to your benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
But then, is there anything that you do to kind of keep that human factor? It's not all about, being monitored, and anything that you do to maybe put them at ease when these kind of tools come in?
I think that the pushback for technology often lives in generations that weren't accustomed to using it as a benefit. They see it as oversight all the time. I think that what happens is when you withhold information about a system or a new way of doing things, you just innately are feeding anxiety. So for us, we just talk about them as much as we can and as often.
If you had to pinpoint one kind of tool that has really kind of made a difference, what would you say is the big thing for you? Would it be the cameras, the sensors, or is there anything else that you would like to mention?
I think the cameras have been a huge thing for us in terms of liability, also return on investment. The one really amazing thing about Beaver is that we own everything. So every piece of equipment, every truck that you see, we own it. And so there is a different level of responsibility that comes with that, and that responsibility that is communicated with that. So I think that that has been huge because we can frame it in, this is how we protect ourselves so that we can continue to operate in the same business model. From a safety standpoint for our team, because I started in safety, you know, the technological advances that have happened even in my lifetime in safety, is being able to take pictures like immediately. When I first started in safety, an incident, we would have like an incident kit, and it included a disposable camera. So I think that for the safety department, from a liability standpoint, being able to take pictures in real time and seeing what you're taking and understanding the angle is off, the lighting is off, I didn't capture what I needed. We use an app internally in our department that timestamps it as well. And that has been that's a game changer. That is a game changer for us because no one can lie, right?
Yeah, you've got a record then and there of what the condition was or whatever it is.
Even MSHA and OSHA are different in that respect. So if you are doing coal mining, you will be audited 4 times a year. You know that they're coming.
Wow.
If you are doing aggregate production, you will be audited twice a year. You know that they're coming. And there is a different level of a safety culture on sites like that because you're in it over and over again. And they may show up and be there for 5 days. And I don't know how long your audits, I mean, ours are, they're there until they're not there anymore.
Yeah.
On the OSHA side of things, manufacturing typically gets hit harder. But I worked, in my previous safety life, we had paving crews and milling crews. And we had operators who had been with us for 30 years who had never seen an inspector, not once.
Wow.
So
Stark difference.
There is, and from a safety compliance, like even in my world, that's a really hard gap to bridge for them to understand the magnitude of how important it is to do something consistently. So for us, it sounds ridiculous, but being able to take pictures in real time and see the result immediately, game changer.
And in the industry in general, would you say that it's behind or ahead when it comes to adopting new technology, AI, when it comes to safety? Would you say we're kind of behind or we're getting there or we're ahead of the game?
I think I hate to speak in general terms and I hate to stereotype, but I think that we are behind. It's not a super simple answer because I think so many things, it's like siloing it. Like it all goes hand in hand. So it depends on the company. It depends on how open they are with communication. It depends on if they're entrepreneurial. Typically, companies who are more progressive tend to entertain and adopt new ways of doing things quicker. And not only are they more open to it, but they're more open to the adoption of it. But I do think that there is, it's that mentality. We've always done it this way. If it's not broken, don't fix it, right?
Have you observed many differences in the younger people that are coming into the industry compared to the kind of more experienced, older employees and how they approach safety?
Yes and no. I think there's always exceptions to the rule. I think that every generation in itself has their own points where they don't want to flex.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is a difference, and what I'll tell you is maybe not even the acceptance of electronic versus not. It's really a difference in how they communicate and how open they are to collaboration. So I think so much of it has to do with how we're framing things. And it's interesting for me in my role, I don't struggle in the field. Where I struggle, where I have the most pushback is in the office. So, the grumpiest of the grumpiest, like I target them, and usually they're the quickest to be open to adapting to a new way of things because they're frustrated or they haven't found a good way to do something. It's the office that usually has the most pushback.
Wow.
So
No, I didn't expect you to say that.
yeah. It's funny because the guys that are usually get the bad rap of not adapting or not being open are usually the ones who want to change the quickest because their job will be made easier.
So if you could say if there was one safety mindset or practice you wished every team would adopt straight away, what would you say that would be?
We have a tendency to, and I think in this like in industry in general, because we're so production mindset, because we are so quick to move to the next iteration, we have a tendency to take the first story, right? So if somebody comes to us with an issue and they say that it's truth, then we take it as truth and we go off, we make all of the judgment calls based on that. So my biggest thing is, and what we talk about in the safety team is like pause and seek to understand. Why are they upset? Why are they struggling? What was the actual incident? Like, what is the root cause of what's going on? And take that 5 minutes before to audit, before you start making judgment calls or redoing a work practice or engaging people out on the site or getting upset. We get real quick to anger or misunderstanding, and when we address any issue that way, people just shut down. It's just how we're wired. So if we can kind of go in a bit softer, I think that that's been really helpful in this team.
I think when those kind of situations come up, because we are human, we make mistakes, and I've seen it firsthand. People will hide it rather than bringing it up because they're scared of what's going to happen.
I still don't think that everybody here knows what to do with me all the time because of the way that I walk into those situations. And so part of the framing that I tell people is, that's fine. You don't have to tell me, but you all talk so much that I'm going to know in 48 hours anyway. So you might as well get ahead of your story, because they do. So if we can just have those moments, the biggest redo that we had to do, and the best way that I could empower our team in safety and all of the guys doing the work is just frame it. Frame it as a coaching moment. Frame it as how we can be better. And that is taking hold, which is nice, because part of the pushback of not wanting to adopt technology or not wanting, the AI or the cameras or whatever is not allowing the framework to be a lesson, like a learning opportunity, I guess.
If you had to give a tip to someone when it comes to dealing with regulation and all this sort of thing, if you had to give a tip to someone that was, maybe starting to work in health and safety, or starting a company and they need to start, getting savvy with health and safety, what tip would you give them to kind of make sure they start off on the right foot?
It doesn't matter how much you know if you don't know how to treat people.
Mm.
So no one cares how well you know regulation if you can't disseminate the information properly, and if you can't respectfully communicate what that is. Leading by example. So it doesn't matter how much you know if you don't walk into a scenario that is engaging and respectful, and to be really vulnerable. I ask questions about things that I know about all of the time, because it allows an opportunity to have a conversation, and it also allows people who are really proud of the work that they do to talk about it. And I always end up learning at the end of it because I've allowed that space to talk about it. But the last one is, don't get into safety if you don't like people, because it's all about people first and regulation second. So it's the same with onboarding. Don't have the grumpiest person on site do your onboarding, because that's the person's first experience with your culture.
That was our last question. So that's all we have for today. But thank you so much for joining me today, Katie. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you to anyone listening for tuning in today's episode. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for more episodes of Breaking Ground. And we'll see you next time.